I want to talk to you today about what I believe to be a big problem in the church today. And I don't mean a big problem in Kenosha Family Church. I mean a big problem in Christianity around the world. And maybe more so in my context, American Christians, than in some other places. And the problem is, that I have observed, is low self-esteem. And I don't just mean the psychological low self-esteem that we hear so much about, which is a problem, not just in the church, but in America. And of course, we also have the opposite problem in America. We have a little bit of pride problem sometimes. But I'm talking about spiritual low self-esteem. I think that just too often Christians are Christians and they still feel bad about themselves. And they dwell on being poor Christians. And I don't mean not having much money Christians. I mean and I'm going to get a little bit into that momentarily to give you some examples. But I want to talk about the causes of this problem. I think they're at least twofold. I'm at least going to tell you about two. And one of those is that it's kind of an occupational hazard. Unfortunately, it's kind of built into the mix of Christianity that the danger of having low self-esteem spiritually is sort of built into that. And here's some reasons why. One, we're not supposed to be proud. The Bible teaches us that we're supposed to be humble and meek. And so as we try that, as we practice being humble and meek, we get into that, we're not worth anything and we're just bad people. Including that we've learned to say, we're just sinners saved by grace, which is not false. It is a true statement that we are sinners saved by grace. But when we dwell on that aspect, it kind of takes down our spiritual self-esteem. We kind of feel bad about ourselves. And the number of Christians, pretty much everyone that I know that ever brought up the subject, will say, "Oh, I'm no saint." Because, we are taught not to claim sainthood. And where does that come from? Well, where it doesn't come from? The Bible. In fact, saint is really like one of Paul's favorite words for addressing Christians. He's constantly talking about, the saints in Rome, the saints in Philippi. And by saints, he doesn't mean the superstar Christians that are better than all the others and more ethical than all the others. He's talking about the church people. And so if he were writing us a letter, he would say the saints in Kenosha. And by that, he would mean you. You would be part of that. But we don't want to seem like we're bragging, and we don't want to seem like we think we're better than we are, and those kinds of things. And so we proudly declare, "I'm no saint." Our hymnology, the songs that we sing, shape us. In fact, back when I was a college student, this was before even seminary, I had a class called Music and Worship. And I did a paper on the topic of how what we sing impacts our theology or what we believe and how we think about Christianity. And you'd be amazed at how, the preacher could get up and preach every week, and then you talk to members on Thursday about a certain belief, and their belief is coming from the songs they've been singing, not from the sermons they've been hearing. Music just has that effect on people. But take this hymn, for example, by Isaac Watts, which the church has been singing for over 300 years now. He wrote it that long ago, and it's been popular in the Christian church all that time. Alas, and did my Savior bleed, and did my sovereign die? Would he devote that sacred head for such a worm as I? I'm just a worm. That's what we're kind of taught. And, you know, this came from a good place. You know, he wasn't trying to be bad at theology, but, you know, God created us in the image of a worm. I don't think that's right. We were created in God's image. I don't know that it's good theology to call ourselves worms. Even though we were fallen sinners, we still have God's image in a way. And then there's another aspect that contributes to our low self-esteem, and that's the way the world treats us and views us. For example, Christian beliefs are ridiculed as irrational and illogical and even silly. Have you heard people say, what, you believe God just spoke and the universe exists? They talk about, you know, not believing in God as creator is just kind of silly, is the attitude that we get. And you go right on down the line, wait a minute, you believe that this guy was born in 2,000 years ago, you know, he was a carpenter and became a preacher, and then a bunch of people started following him, and he was crucified, buried, and came back to life? You believe that? You know, and you thought, you know, and I've heard people talk about how silly some of the other religions' beliefs are, and then they turn around and bring it right back at us. And the truth is, the God miracles, the way God acts, what we believe happened, if it weren't true, it would be downright silly. It would be silly from an outsider who doesn't believe. And so, but that's constantly thrown at us. Our beliefs are ridiculed. And our ethics and lifestyle, those are ridiculed as well. They're considered to be controlling and antiquated and impractical. And you know, you can't live like that. As a an observer of the world, from the time I began ministry, even to today, even in that time period, which is not massive, it's been a while now, sexual behavior has changed dramatically in America. I remember as a kid, you know, when there was unwanted pregnancies, they were kind of kept hush-hush, and you know, I could remember my mom and my aunts whispering about so-and-so's pregnant and those kinds of things. And between now and then, it has become normalized in our world. It's expected. And when people talk about virgins getting married, they don't believe it. They just can't hardly accept that concept. And on it goes. And so, you know, so the Christian lifestyle, and you know, loving your enemy, well, how's that going to work? You know, how'd that work out for you? You know, well, I got abused. And so, you know, that's old-fashioned and antiquated. And so we're drilled with that kind of talk and information. And Christian hope is ridiculed as dysfunctional dreaming and wishful thinking and unreasonable. Wait, what? You think you're going to die and wake up and go to heaven? And go to this place where, like, the streets, instead of cracking potholed asphalt, are going to be made of gold, and you're going to walk around and just singing, you know, and all that. And that's just pie in the sky thinking. And what that's really doing is it's stopping you from being responsible here and now, you know, and because you've got this hope in the future, and you just need to understand that what you have here is all you've got. And so they think that, you know, that hope of a resurrection is just wishful thinking and unreasonable. That's just silliness. And part of the reason, of course, is because there's no evidence to that would muster in a court of law. There's not that kind of evidence. There's not visible proof that these things are true. And so the combination of that occupational hazard, that, trying to be humble and not proud, and the way the world views us and treats us. You put that stuff together and you live with it day after day after day, it results in our having that spiritual low self-esteem I'm talking about. We just want to, people want to kind of keep their Christianity quiet, and they don't want people to know, and they don't want to talk about it because that draws attention that's unwelcome in some ways. And it sort of affects the way we carry out our mission, which is to win the world for Jesus. If you have a low self-esteem and don't believe you're a good Christian, and you don't want to be ridiculed and all of these kinds of things, it makes it hard to go out and try to win others, I think. So today, I want to address this low self-esteem with a reminder inspired by a message from General Superintendent Emeritus Dr. David Graves at General Assembly 2 weeks ago in Sunday morning worship. He was a General Superintendent when he delivered the speech. Since then, he has retired and he's been replaced. But he said something in another context that really kind of spoke to me and kind of inspired this. When we get to that part, I'll point it out to you. But it begins with looking at 1 John 3:1. 1 John 3:1. So remember, we're not talking about the Gospel of John, but rather the short letter from John near the end of the Bible, page 884, if you're using a worship Bible. Otherwise, go to the very back and turn back a few pages. 1 John 3:1. See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. The reason the world does not know us is that it did not know Him. And so that's the passage. 1 John 3:1. And I want to look at 5 different aspects that show up in this short verse. The first is he talks about the great love. And what he's going to do is he's going to talk about something that God does or did. And he starts off by letting us know that love was the reason or the motive for it. It was love that caused God to do this. Love was the driving force behind what we're about to talk about. He didn't do it out of pity. He didn't do it out of duty or responsibility. He didn't do it because that's the way it had to be done. It was something he did because of his love for us. Love is the reason. And it turns out, other passage tells us that God is love. And we have the love chapter that kind of defines how love operates and what love is supposed to look like. And so just briefly, we remember that to the extent that we're supposed to be like Him, love should be our driving motive, the reason that we do things, and the reason for that kind of thing. The second thing is he uses the word lavish. God didn't just love us, He lavished us with love. And that word lavish is not a word that we use an awful lot on a day-to-day basis, partly because it's a rare thing. It actually has the meaning of to bestow profusely or in extravagant quantities. I love that word, extravagant quantities. Every now and then you go to a restaurant and someone talks about, boy, those were big portions. They were lavish with that. But to help us think about it, and this is the General Superintendent David Graves was talking about God, His lavish love, and he was using a different direction than what I'm doing, but he encouraged us to imagine a dump truck. Just get in your mind a dump truck, and I'm going to help you by giving you an image of a dump truck. Now, this particular dump truck is a 20-ton payload dump truck. That is the back end of this dump truck, where the money maker, the size of the load. This truck can hold 20 tons. Now, for you mathematicians in the room, where's Caleb when you need him?
Yeah.
20 tons, 2,000 pounds in a ton, that's 40,000 pounds of dirt or gravel or whatever it is. But I want you to forget about that truck. That truck doesn't really work well for our illustration. Instead, I want you to look at this truck. Imagine that one. That's a Caterpillar 797. And instead of a 20-ton truck, this is a 40-ton payload truck. 400 ton. That's 20 times the size of the previous truck. That previous truck could come and dump 20 loads into the back of this truck if it had a ramp to climb up and dump in front. So think about that truck. And the cars, I picked one with a car in front of it so you can kind of see the scale. But otherwise it's hard to tell just how big we're talking. Kind of looks like a NASCAR car, doesn't it, Jeff?
It does.
Maybe that is a NASCAR truck, or car, Yeah, speaking of monster trucks, that truck would make them look little. Well, what I want you to imagine is imagine this truck filled with love instead of dirt or gravel, so now you have to really kind of be creative in your mind. Think about this truck being filled with love. And imagine God dumping it on you. So you're standing there behind the truck, and God says, dump it. And all of that love in the back of this truck just comes out on you. Now this particular kind of truck, instead of, for a construction site like when we built our church, this is the kind of truck they use primarily for like mining applications. They're going to tear up a mountain and see how much iron ore or gold or whatever it is they're mining for, coal, they can get out of all of the rock and gravel in the mountain. But in your case, it's all love. It's all God's love. And he just dumps it on you. And in these applications, you know what they do when the truck gets a load and comes and dumps it? It backs out and heads back, and another truck like it pulls up and dumps again. So imagine that. God is dumping this massive load of love on you, and then he does it again and again and again. That's that idea of God lavishing you with his love. It just seems like more love than you could ever need or could handle, but that's how much God loves you. So just try to get that mental picture in your minds. The third aspect, the result of this lavish love being dumped on you is that you are called children of God. Now, I really wanted to kind of explain to you how significant and important that is. And as I tried to come up with the right words, I finally kind of admitted that we can't comprehend just how profound that is. Think about God, Almighty, creator of the universe, and think about you and how strong you are, and all of that. And God says, you're my children. You're my children. That is just more profound than we can even think about. Now, even on by earthly analogy standards, we all understand the privileges associated with being the child of an important person. We see it at work. If there's a promotion being given, and it's between you and the boss's son, guess who's probably going to get it? The boss's son. There's privilege. I had a friend who is a great guy, and he's a quality guy, and he's a district superintendent now. But you know how he got to be known well enough to be elected as a district superintendent? Because his dad was a district superintendent, in his case. And in his case, I think it was still a good choice. He's a good one. But that recognition, oh, you're so-and-so's son. Yeah, you know, and so he got to be more well-known, and he eventually was elected district superintendent. And it happens everywhere. There's privilege with being a child of the boss, or the owner, or the CEO, or whatever. You know, nowadays, there are celebrities who are very popular, and you know what they're famous for? For being some rich guy's child. That's their claim to fame. And so that genre exists. And so you aren't a child of the president of General Motors. You know, you're not a child of you know, the Twitter guy. You're a child of God. Let that sink in. You're a child of God. At least you're called one. Which brings us to the next one. And that is what we are. See, we're not just called children of God. We are children of God. One of my favorite biblical scholars, Dr. F.F. Bruce, said this: when God calls, his call is effectual. It has an effect. People and things are what he calls them. If God calls you his child, you are his child. It's not just a label. Another biblical scholar, I. Howard Marshall, writing on the same topic, said this: this is no legal fiction. The picture is that of legitimization. By naming as his child, the father acknowledges that it is indeed his child. He doesn't call you that. You know, have you ever met these like honorary offices? I have a cousin, uncle, a cousin or an uncle, who is an honorary Kentucky colonel. Now in Kentucky, that's a big thing. But you know, he was never a colonel. But they'd given him that honorary title as a way of honoring him. Jim, I think, is our only doctor in the house. But I know some doctors who didn't do the schooling to be called a doctor. They've had colleges, they've risen to a certain level or a certain position, and because of that, the college that they went to or something will call and say, we want to give you an honorary doctorate degree. From now on, you'll be called a doctor, and you know, you'll have that label and the honors that go with it, but we all know you didn't do it. And I don't say that in front of honorary doctors. But God's not doing that. When he says you're his child, it's because he has made you his child. You are a child of God. The fifth and last. It says at the end of the verse that the world does not know us, didn't know him, because it didn't know him. And here's the way that works. The lack of respect and the ridicule doesn't delegitimize our status. It proves it. Because there was this thought that, well, if I was a child of God and I'm famous and I've got all these privileges, why doesn't the world recognize me that way? Why aren't I given special respect and honors and looked up to, and you know, why doesn't the world think highly of me? That must prove that I'm really not. But the opposite is true, because the writer says, basically, that we shouldn't expect to be treated better than Jesus. He was rejected, ridiculed, and even crucified. So it's like the reason the world doesn't honor and respect you for being a child of God, because it's never respected and honored the child of God. From the time Jesus came, he was rejected, except by a small handful. The world at large rejected Jesus, ridiculed Jesus, ignored Jesus as best they could, until they finally had to crucify him. And then we think, well, why doesn't the world love me? I'm a child of God. Well, that's why. Because you're a child of God, you should expect the world to not embrace you. You should expect the world to not honor and respect you. So here's my opinion. I lost something here. If we grasp, even minutely, just a little bit, that we are children of God, that should cure our spiritual low self-esteem. If you really take to heart and really begin to understand, even just a little bit, that you are a child of God, you shouldn't live a life of oh, I'm just not worth anything, I'm just a nobody, one guy said, a guy came to him once and said, you know, you're nothing without God. And the guy's like, I know that. But I'm not without God. See the difference that makes? You're not worthless, you're not scum, you're not just a worm, you know. Because you're made in the image of God, and God made you his child. A child of God. Let's pray.